Fifth Frontier War. This is essentially a board game based on the Traveller universe and well integrated with materials that go with certain adventures that were published, and very, very easily adaptable as a backdrop for a campaign. I forget what the pain in the ass it is to set this thing up. It is really annoying, especially given the fact that I think I'm missing a couple of pieces, but it's not that big a deal. I actually thought I had, I think I actually had extra pieces of certain types too, so I'm not absolutely certain that the manifests for the full setup are actually even correct. But one of the problems with setup for this is that you have to make a lot of decisions, and in terms of, hey, what can I defend? What can I, how do I make my attacks, etc. And it's essentially a naval or a space game. It's a operational level conflict in one region at the beginning of a war. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the components to begin with. All right, first thing is all these number counters. So instead of normal step losses for units, etc., what they use is this percentage loss system, which honestly, it's also used in Invasion Earth. I'm not sure if it's used, I don't think it's used in Imperium. I think that's a much nicer system. But you use these values to indicate what percentage of the unit remains in terms of effective capabilities. That kept me away from GDW war games to a large extent. Yes, I played, I have a couple of the Series 120s, etc. But I'm just terrified that they use that system in Europa and stuff like that. I know that they don't now, but at the time, I was like, well, no, I'm not touching that shit, man. This is a pain in the ass. It's worth it for Traveller, but it is not worth it normally. You also have the board, which represents various systems of importance. Only the major planet is dealt with in them. If you're a Traveller fan, you're going to understand a lot of this a lot more, but it is perfectly playable as not a Traveller fan. Oh, let me go a little bit into my history with this. So I was really into Traveller, but never managed to get the role-playing game to work the way I wanted to completely. And we had fun with it, but I couldn't get the story going the way. There are weird things about Traveller as a game. But anyway, so I had to pick this up along with just about anything Traveller related that I could get my hands on, including the Striker, the minis game, which, I knew I was never going to build minis for it. I have a friend who does. This has been close to the top of my list for a long time for personal want to play. I'm not sure why, because honestly, I don't think I've ever completed a game of it. It gets pretty dull pretty quickly. But one of the interesting facets of it is it's a written orders game which works really well solo. It's actually the first one that I saw that I thought, wow, this is actually pretty good solo. For many of the same reasons that the Dean Essex games are, which is that you're writing specific hex by hex orders here, but you've got enough units or enough commands in place that are doing things, and the things they're doing take enough time. It's not like you're doing a simultaneous plot for one turn's movement. You're doing movement in advance. That kind of means you forget what the hell's going on, which may not be the best for executing your strategic plans, but it does create a situation where it is eminently solo playable as far as I'm concerned. I know some people are like, oh, let's make, there's a couple of variants out there to try to make it more solo friendly. I think they would make it less so. I think one of the things that is most solo friendly about the game is actually the written orders. Components, map. Yeah. So the map itself represents the various planets, and for the most part, you just got a planet, a name. The name's going to be represented over here, and these are divided by quarters of the map, and then alphabetically arranged. This is not an optimal way to find anything. Notably, what's particularly hard, it's not that hard to look at a planet and find it over here. What's really hard is finding a planet from here as to where it is on there, which is a necessary thing to do, at least during setup. And I think at other times as well, you're like, oh, I have a lot of troops there. Let me get those off that planet and use them somewhere. And then you're like, oh, I don't know where that planet is, especially when there are counters covering up the names of some of the planets. The actual information on the map is pretty limited, and it's of some value. So it's mainly about fueling. The red planets are forbidden for the Imperium to enter at all, I think. Well, not sure. They may be able to refuel like gas giants at them. But they're forbidden for the Imperium to land troops on or use the bases of, etc., although they're not going to have bases. They're going to have an X base. But until and unless the Zodani, their opponent over here, or one of their client states, ends up entering that hex. At that point, you're free to do, you're free to treat it as the rest of the board. The yellow ones are just, they're amber zone. There's like a traveler's advisory against going there. The military is fine. But these others, there's reasons that you're not supposed, that the Imperium's supposed to keep their hands off those planets. And so all visiting is restricted, and even the military is under restrictions in this game. Although I'm not sure how much that's actually the case in the traveler adventures and whatnot that I had. The other information that's here is a letter which indicates the starport class. The closer to A, the better. They go A, B, C, D, E, and then X. E is sort of a minimal starport. There's no capability there. But the others indicate how much fueling you can do. And there's a chart that tells you. We can take a look at that. This is the presence of a gas giant. What's not on here is the presence of planetary oceans, which is over here if the planet has a blue color to it. What is the difference between gray and white over here? I don't know. Yeah, I don't remember. One thing I can tell you is that there's no indication here of who owns the planet, which would be a very helpful piece of information. The hex the planet's on would be a very helpful piece of information. I may start writing those in because, it's not like this is particularly a saleable copy. What else do we have? Okay. You also have the presence of bases. This is a scout base, which affects setup, and I think it affects refueling as well. And this is a naval base, which allows infinite refueling, and it also can impact setup in some cases, for the Imperium in some cases. The enemies only have base, which is a different symbol. It acts pretty much the same as a naval base. Over on the planetary display, you have the starport class there again. You have the tech level. Tech level is going to be important in this game for a couple of reasons. One, it indicates how well the indigenous forces are equipped. If they have a high-tech level, they have high-tech equipment and can fight better. And these numbers range from, well, 0, but there's no population there, if that's the case. But pretty damn low. You see there's a 2 here, all the way up to 15, which is the Imperial maximum. There is a unit in the game that is tech level 16. I don't know the story behind that one. But there are like remains of ancient stuff that's more advanced than the Imperial maximum. The Zodani are lower tech level in general than the Imperials, but not by a hell of a lot. Enough that it's going to make some differences in combat though. There's a certain asymmetry. Both sides have their own advantages here. One of the advantages being for the Zodani that they're making a surprise attack and the Imperium's not ready for it. And that's the biggest one that affects the game. Over here, you have 2 more values. This one is the number of SDBs, System Defense Boats, that are available in the system. And those can help in a couple of things. They can directly engage any naval assets. They're generally not going to be very strong at that. They can interdict attempts to land on the planet. I don't think they can interfere except by engaging the Navy directly from the gas giants, the high guard position, which actually should be part of this. And the other number here is the number of effective troops that the planet has as sort of an intrinsic garrison. Now, those can range from 0 up to some really large numbers. You can see here 12C, that's 12 times the Roman numeral for C, 100. 20K, well, that's 20,000. Well, I guess they're using more of a metric type situation here. But anyway, those numbers can get quite large. 20K, there is no Space Force that you can deploy that's that size, right? But there are, what is our biggest? 5Cs? Yeah, our biggest is 5C. So this is a planet that would be almost impossible to take except by bombing it into submission, which is possible. It's an expensive way to take planets, though. What about other stuff? Units? Well, we have 4 major nations, if you will. We have the Imperium, which is this red area here. And then we have the Zodan, which is this little arms coming over. And they're the main enemy. The Sword Worlds are down here. They support the Zodan. And the Vargar are over here. And they're also fighting against the Imperium. The Imperium's the big bad guy, right? Or good guy, I'm not sure. All of these, well, the Vargar are not apes. They're canine humanoid critters. The others, I believe, all look like humans. However, the Zodani are a distinct race in that they have a high propensity of psionic powers, which is going to impact the game in a couple of different ways. Some of them just on counter values, but some of them on special abilities that they have. Over here we have spaceships. For the most part, I've got troops intermingled here, kind of illegally, but you got we've got a number of different values on a spaceship. First, the class of the ship. So this is a B, it's a battleship. You also have cruisers. This is transports A. You have tankers T, and you have scouts S, and I'm going to have a hard time finding them. There's some. You'll notice some of the counters have white printing instead of black. Those are colonial troops. That has an effect on quality. The next thing you have, well, you have an image of the ship, which doesn't matter at all. You have a little circle up here, and that is going to be either empty, half full, or completely full. That indicates the capability for grabbing fuel with the ship. An empty circle is completely streamlined. It can pull fuel off planetary waters, assuming SDBs allow it in and whatnot. Partial streamline is able to pull fuel off gas giants, and unstreamlined, the black dot, is unable to refuel on its own. Sort of. They still have boats and stuff, so you can always refuel, I think. It just takes you a full turn to do it. So it slows down your advance. So there's no, oh, I'm completely screwed, I have no fuel situations that come up in the game, as far as I know. Worst comes to worst, you find some asteroids and you start mining them because the fuel is hydrogen, so you're taking the water and separating it out and whatnot, or the contents of the gas giant atmosphere. Troops. Well, let's talk about troops in a moment. Oh, we didn't talk completely about ships. So ships have 3 numbers on them. The first number is their attack value. The second number is their bombardment value when they're bombing a planet. And the third number is their defensive value. And that'll be handled in the combat results table. You shoot at defense values. The defense values don't get a fire back at you. So you're going to be using your offensive capability to try to penetrate the defensive capability of the ship. And quite a few, for the most part, they have higher defensive capabilities than they do offensive. There are some exceptions, perhaps. I'm not sure. Then we have, there's one other number on here. So next to the class of the ship, the B, and this is a really important number, it's the movement factor, the jump value of the ship. And these range from 2 to 5. Only spaceships are represented by counters in the game. The ships that are non-spaceships are the SDBs, which include bases and such not as well, and are all much more abstracted. You also have leaders over here. Now, leaders are associated, they have a rank number. The lower the rank, the better. They have a star to tell you that they've got a star on them. Some of them are better ranked, and they have 2 stars. That is just to help you see instead of the number. And then they have 2 values. The second value is a combat modifier that helps their space combat values. The first number, though, is the important one. That's how many turns in advance you have to plot that leader's movement. Now, those range from 0 probably up to 4. 0 means you never have to plot that leader. They have some kind of capability to sort of magically, probably psionically, understand the situation. A 1 probably means an exceedingly effective commander who's not using psionic abilities. Now, there are actually, the Duke of Regina has a 0. I don't know this from the universe, but I am guessing he actually has psionic abilities because for the most part, only the Zodani have such good leaders. And Zodani nobility, who obviously are going to be more likely to be admirals, are all psionic. So, however, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily effective at organizing and getting their troops to work. What else do we have? Ground troops. Ground troops come in a number of different flavors, hugely ranging in combat factors, running from 1 up to 5C for the counters. And that's their attack value, which is on the left. And on the right is their tech level, which is going to affect how well they fight. And there are a couple of other modifiers to it. You have armored units kicking around. Here's a mechanized, that counts as armor. I'm implying that anything that has the armor circle, including armored cav and whatnot, counts as an armored unit. That doubles their combat strength for inflicting casualties. You have a dot, which indicates it's an elite unit, which also doubles their combat strength for inflicting casualties. You have some color differentiation, which is of some importance. The whites include Marines, who are not jump troops. I find that disturbing. You have things called jump troops, which are able to sort of slip into the planet more easily. Sort of your special forces or whatever, but really they just have better equipment to get them to insert them. These are mercenaries, which have some penalties once they start taking hits. These are special. They're guerrilla units. They are each worth 10% of the planetary intrinsic defense. And they're fighting against the planet. There's Zodani aligned anti-imperials who I have coordinated on 2 planets with very high population, very high intrinsic defenses, with the idea that, maybe not that high, with the idea that I'm able to recover those, and I don't think the intrinsic defenses can recover, so I should be able to wear them down unless the Imperials are able to destroy these. And they sit in a covert or overt state. If they're overt, they can be attacked. If they're covert, they're mixed in with the population and they're immune and they can recover damage. Oh. You have fleet markers, which collect your units. This is not just a notational thing, though. You basically can't move anything except scout ships and admirals alone unless they're incorporated into a fleet. And you have a limited number of fleets. You actually have more admirals than you have fleets. You have, in part, that's because the Sword Worlds loans an admiral to the Zodan, and the Imperials have an admiral from the Vargar on their side. And why do I have this here? I do not want that there. I don't know where I'm going to put this. He has to go somewhere else because I want this admiral in command. He's a better admiral. Oh, I think that's enough for now. I'm going to get into the rules a little later, but I actually have to work soon. Did I cover? Oh, well, I didn't cover these sheets. Oh, if you don't have an admiral in a fleet, it can still move. It has a 0 combat bonus, which makes some of these have like a minus bonus kind of questionable. And it has, for the Zodan, a 4 command delay essentially, and for anyone else a 5. So it's not really something you want to do. But you might be in a position where you have to build a fleet and you don't have an admiral kicking around near it. You have reinforcement boxes. I'll explain them in a bit. The Zodani get reinforcements on turn 10 and turn 20, including fleets and admirals and whatnot. The Imperials get an interesting mix of reinforcements. Something happens on turn 2. They get a bunch more fleets on turn 2 and admirals, which actually just delays their plot writing by yet another turn. They start off, like I said, surprise attack. They're not allowed to have any written plots before the game starts. The Zodani are allowed to. I haven't written any out yet. I've done the rest of setup. This set comes in turn 6. And here's something where the game doesn't really tell you where they come in. But it indicates they come in at a given hex. So here's what I'm doing. This set is coming in with its first jump movement at J. Talona. This set at Isatina. Both of these come in at Kronar. You might argue, well, wait, isn't this closer to that? Yeah. The Zodani, this is really kind of an arm. There's really no communications. That's kind of voidish and not really under their control. So that seems the most appropriate way to handle things. These charts. So you got a setup chart over here, which really just tells you everything you need to do. Oh, there's a bunch more Imperial units. Bunch more units here that come in through random die rolls for reinforcements. And then this set here, well, this is the turn 2 reinforcements. This set can randomly come in their special ships that have black globe generators, which allow them to kind of slip into a system invisibly. They're not giving any combat advantage to the Black Globe generator. They're saying, well, that's just built into the combat capabilities of the ship, and that's fair. But they do give those particular ships some special capabilities where they're able to perform actions without the enemy like being able to react when they're in the space system. This is actually not a complicated game. But it has some weird situations in it. So, Space Combat Results Table, you're basically going to sum up the attack factors that you're firing at the enemy. You roll a die, and then the damage is the number of defense factors that you hit. And ships, generally, not that one. I say generally. Have a damaged side. They take normal step losses. That's wonderful. Okay, there's rules. If there's no enemy navy in the play, you're allowed to go in and try to bomb the SDBs. And you add up your bombardment factors and compare it to the number of SDBs. I think there's a die roll involved in this. And that's the percentage of loss you get. Similarly, it may just be automatic, I don't remember. When the SDBs are fighting against the squadron, when they're being bombed, or if you're trying to land troops or something like that, the current number of SDBs is compared to a die roll, and that'll create a number of hits against the fleet that's operating. Percentage loss table just allows you to see how many strength points you have given a certain percentage loss factor on a counter. Surface bombardment, again, you total your bombardment factors and you roll a die, and that's how much of, I believe, a percent of damage you do to the ground troops. That's a pretty big thing, right? Bombardment doesn't care. The denser you are, the more damage it's going to do. For these tracks, you can go and wrap around and hit the chart more than once. So if you had like 96, you would basically be running twice on the 48 table. If you have 97, twice on the 48, once on the 1. Troop combat results. Troop battles are handled using regular combat odds and rounded in favor of the defender. Either side can declare an attack, I believe. You may have to. Tech level modifies the die roll. Atmosphere also modifies the die roll, increasing the damage if the atmosphere is nasty. Let me think what else. All right. I'll dig into the rules in a little bit because we want to get into the specifics of it. But this is really the intro to it. And what you're going to see is a game in which the Zodani victory conditions, well, both sides have the same victory condition. Basically, to get more than 300 points better than the other person. Victory conditions are based only on the tech level of the planets you've captured. If you capture neutral planets, they're worth half the tech level. If you capture planets of the enemy, they're worth full tech level. If you capture certain special things, regional capitals, subsector capitals, and such, they're worth double. And the game goes until basically there's an armistice. The Zodani declare victory, which they're allowed to do, but they're allowed to force an armistice. But the earlier they do it, they're penalized like multiple levels of on the victory table. So if they do relatively well early on, that's fine, but they have to get to a point where they can still win the game while taking those penalties. And basically they're forcing the Imperials to the bargaining table. There is an automatic victory, which is over 300 tech level points. That's like 30 planets. Now, I don't know how deep I've gotten into the game. I really don't know. I may have gotten past like turn 10 or so. before I give up, largely because my planning has been so shitty beforehand in the game. And I feel like I'm trying to engage the enemy but don't really have a goal. Well, this time I spent a little bit more effort. I've got marked like 2 plays on BGG. It's probably more like 6 or 7, but most of them long ago. Whatever I have marked on BGG is either what I've played since BGG's existence or what I've played, including solo, that got recorded on my old Gamebox stuff. I used to have a website. Well, I used to have a box of cards that I collected and recorded all my plays as well as people's ratings, whatnot. And then, I had a website up there that, kept this information, but it was just about local people. And then many years later, I found out that BGG started sometime afterwards. And was doing the same kind of thing. I mean, it's not an unreasonable thing. I actually was trying to get it so that it would be a broader thing. The problem was I didn't really know how to write a website very well. And I also had very few people, like no one was able to enter their values automatically. Anyway. But I thought it would be a really great resource for people to be able to rate games. And so when I did find BGG some, 15 years later or whatever, it was less than that, more like 12, 13 years later. I was pretty damn happy to see something that was collecting all these ratings on every game. All right. I'll come back with a deeper dive into the rules. I don't know how deep it's going to go because GDW has a really bad formatting for their rules. It's just like solid paragraphs of information. No case numbers or anything like that. Not a lot of reference capability. Luckily, though, it is a simple game. Before we get to the rules book itself, and I'm going to try not to just read through it this time. One thing, I kind of have cheated. It's not a big deal. Some of my fleets, especially the Zerdani fleets, have preloaded troops on them. Technically, you're not supposed to do that, but it eases the decision-making of setup a great deal in terms of what can I move, what can I not. I might make some further decisions as to landing or dropping troops, but there's really almost nowhere where you'd be in a position where you could evacuate your forces. Okay, so let us take a look at what we got here. Let's look at the sequence of play. Now, this is kind of, this goes back. This is when my first wife and I were together. We must have played it. That's definitely her handwriting. I know I didn't play this with my second wife. I always find it so amazing to see, like, I don't know, my handwriting is so shitty. I can try to write nicely. My script looks better than my... But this is just, wow. How do you fucking write that well? Like, letter that well. This isn't like calligraphy or anything where real effort's being put in. This is just what her writing was like. And it's like, geez, that's clear. My second wife's writing on grocery lists was illegible, so at least I had that. But when she'd try to write something kind of cleanly, I think it would look much better than mine. But not to this degree. This amazes me. Anyway, let's take a look at this. So the first thing that happens is any reinforcements are generated, placed, whatever. They come on off map and fly onto the map with one movement point to begin with. And I found something that actually said in the errata that implied this. I don't know. I haven't found a rule for it, and I'm not going to page through because I think what I've got is good enough. Likewise, the Sword World's reinforced from down here. Going into Graham is their first move. Okay. Replacements. This is something I haven't explained. You get replacement points each turn. Well, every 10 turns, actually. And we got a per turn one here. Huh. Okay. They comprise both squadron and troop replacement points, and I believe they get placed as reinforcements if you're building new units completely. But you are also able to refit your squadrons, I think, at bases that can handle them. And troops, I don't know, there's no supply rules, so. I would feel kind of funny if like a blockaded planet could reinforce its troops, but anyway. Movement, okay. You roll a die, whoever gets the lowest number is allowed to move, actually must move, all their pieces that do not require plotting. This is basically your scouts and your level 0, your 0 plot admirals. After that, you do X-boat movement. You're allowed to move your admirals, I believe, up to 4 spaces along these green lines. Those are the X-boat routes, and they're not differentiated by nation, which is to say that the X-boat routes for the Imperium are going to be taken over as the Zodan come in, for whatever that means. I don't know. Okay, so each of these is separate. First you do the X-boats, then you do the scouts, then you do the well-led fleets. Then any plots that you have are taken into account. Now, I may cheat here. I'm not sure if I end up doing plotting immediately while I'm moving. So like, if I have to plot 4 turns in advance, I make a move and maybe write down the plot. We'll see what works for me. That's not how it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen after combat. And where that's important, I will respect the rules, you know, where I'm interested in the results of the combat. But sometimes it is of value to shorten things, just to, while you're thinking about where you're moving, you know, where you have to move, you may put down your next plot. I don't know. They probably have done it both ways. Then you go to combat. Black Globe optional rules take place. Any space combat takes place. Then the interface combat. The interface combat is going to be first the system defense boats. So you don't have to do this as the person with a squadron in the area. But if you want to engage the system defense boats, they get to shoot you. You get to bomb them. And then you're allowed to transfer troops. You're not allowed to transfer troops in general without going through the system defense boats first. We'll get to the specifics. Then you write your plots down. You can reorganize your fleets at that point. Guerrilla units either recover or they flip over to a different status. Well, yeah. And then finally, you plot all the movement for all your fleets. Basically, the movement capability is based on the lowest movement capability of a fleet group. So if you have a jump 2 ship in a fleet, you're limited to making movements of no more than 2 hexes. If your whole fleet is jump 4 capable, you can jump up to 4 spaces away. You plot per fleet. You have to keep into account your refueling situation. You are not allowed to plot illegal moves. You are not allowed to plot disregarding fuel requirements. You are allowed to, and must in some cases, plot to abandon units. So for example, And maybe I'll come up with notations to make this easier or whatever. But let's say I have a jump to capable fleet. I might jump to here, jump to here. That's my first two moves. And then I plot down that I'm going to release all the jump 2 ships and jump to here, you know, with a jump 4 capable fleet or whatever, you know, just in order to get my movement up there a little faster. That's going to leave squadrons maybe orphaned without a fleet in their command, and maybe I'll be able to pick them up later. Maybe they're just patrolling that planet. Okay, you are allowed to abort a fleet's plot during any plotting step. I don't like this. Basically, at any point, an admiral is aware enough of what the fuck's going on from external messaging. And so there is no interstellar communication that's faster than the speeds of the ships. That, not at tech level 15. There might be a tech 16, but again, the one unit that's tech 16 is not using the same is not generating the communication network for the entirety of the Imperium. They are whatever they are, probably using ancient technology. Although it may be, cutting edge stuff that's not deployed yet. Anyway, where are we? Right. So you're able to make this call that I don't want to go somewhere. I'm not sure I want to play with that. I kind of like the idea of you're forced to go through with what you plotted unless you can cancel it. Now, that opens up some interesting things, because you do have to be allowed to cancel your plot in certain conditions. Let's say I get into a battle and I'm no longer in a position where I want to pursue the fight. Then I should be able to call the plot off. And so that rule is effectively in place, and I will use it, but in general, I think I will be not trying to cancel plots unless there's some extenuating circumstance that convinces me I don't want to make that plot. Now, there are cases when you must abort your plot if the plot no longer corresponds to reality. For example, if a fleet disengages from space combat, and we'll see how that works. When it's plotted, each of the remaining actions in their plot is turned to a refuel hold plot in the same position. Okay, so the way you plot is, here we've got a turn number. R is for refuel, J is for jump. I guess you could use H for you don't need to refuel, but you're on hold, which maybe makes some sense. And it's possible that you're in a position where you're plotted to refuel, but you can't refuel, in which case you can abort your plot as position. You're going to have to keep track of the fueling situation for your fleets in each case. And that can be kept track of on the plotting, essentially. So if you're plotted to refuel there on turn 6, but the enemy can control the refueling facilities, preventing the fleet from doing so, future action of the fleet plotted moves out. Instead of aborting this, you may insert a refuel hold order for turn 7, moving all the other orders a turn later. When a new fleet is created, you have to write its plot for the required number of turns in the future. You can't do anything with it right away. It's not like some capacity that gives you, by calling something a fleet, you don't immediately get to move it. You're still limited by the command restrictions that you would normally be done. Plotting requirements might change by switching admirals, and there's a bunch of special rules about that. Fleet adjustment. You're not allowed to adjust your fleet so that it breaks your plot. Well, so that it allows you to change your plot or something. If you're going to break your plot, you break your plot. Which might, again, this might be a valid reason. Like, I need to pay, for me to use that rule where you can break your plot, where you can just decide to eliminate all your plots in the future. I come to a place and I've got reinforcements I wasn't expecting to be there. Okay, I'm going to stop, reorganize so that I can incorporate those reinforcements, and maybe I will go somewhere else because of that new information that I have on the scene. Scouts are free to move around as they like. They're not going to do a hell of a lot for you. Basically, they have no firepower in fleet combat. They do have bombardment factors, so they can like fuck around with ground forces. But other than that, they don't do much. They can be used as scouts. So the game does not specify, and somebody actually brought a question up about this, whether or not there's any ability to go pawing through the opponent's stuff to look at things. I largely say there is not. You have these boxes, these composition charts. I think for the most part, you have the information that you have on the scene. This makes the attack a more difficult thing. There's some information that's visible on the board with planets and such not. I will use some of that, but I'm not going to go pawing through the enemy's fleets to see whether or not I have a viable attack there. There was some discussion, the person who was saying, well, you wouldn't want to play it with hidden pieces because that would just make the game longer. I actually think the opposite. I think if you know what you're facing, you're less likely to get into a knockdown, drag-out fight that might actually cause the game to come to some sort of conclusion, which I have never seen it do. Non-scout squadrons can only jump if they're part of a fleet, or retreating. But that's something different. I'm looking for a rule that I keep. Here it is, Imperial Reinforcements. J. Talona, and Icentia, I got that right. Graham. All Zodani reinforcements come in at Kronar. I got that right as well. Excellent. Okay. And they spend their first jump point getting to that space, so you can plot for them to go further than that. Fleets can actually go into the reinforcement boxes. That might be necessary to pick up troops or ships or something that, you want to reinforce, of course. That's especially important for the Imperial reinforcement box, because stuff shows up in there without a commander, and you might have to wait around for a commander to show up. The other reinforcements you're going to be planning for, and you'll have a fleet or whatever, so there's less need for that. Refueling. Refueling is a cool issue. Is one of the key issues to this game. That's kind of weird. A gas giant. Water is supposed to be a water symbol in the center of the surface box. It's this thing, I think. Water fuel is available. Oh, we got the colors. Okay, hospitable, inhospitable, and vacuum. They have an effect on the combat table. That's all that they have. So that's what the colors are for. Awesome. The internal colors. Okay. Yeah, so a dot here indicates that you've got water in the world. It's unfortunately not on the map, but generally, that is not how you're going to be. Most of your fleets are not going to be fully streamlined, so you're not going to be able to get water that way. We'll talk about that in a moment. We go to the refueling table. Now, unfortunately, a lot of information is on the back of the rule book, which is why I lost my staples. So a fleet that's refueling from a gas giant, streamlined and partially streamlined ships can all do that without taking a delay. An unstreamlined fleet, or a fleet that cannot fully fuel, ends up paying a turn. using boats and whatnot to get things. Ocean, only the streamline can go at 0. Starport, we'll talk about that in a second. Bases will always refuel your fleet in 0 time. Now, for the starports, an A quality starport can refuel 4 squadrons in no time. A B, if you control it. A B can do 3 squadrons. C2, D1, E, and X cannot refuel your fleet. Okay. What if there's no fuel available? This is, of course, the big question. I've told you that you can always refuel, but I'm not sure that's the truth. You have tankers, which can refuel ships in no time. They're carrying fuel for 6 squadrons. If you use them, you have to kind of mark them, maybe rotate them or something, to indicate that they can't refuel, but they have their own fuel on board. Well, they can refuel themselves. Or another tanker. If any and all of the tanker's ability to refuel a squadron is used in the turn, it cannot refuel. Okay. I am not sure. I think it is possible to get yourself into a position where you may not refuel. And that causes problems in the game, which we'll get to when we get to the retreat rules. And we may have to add some rules to make that work, right? Most planets have either water, a gas giant, or a starport. But I'm sure that there are cases that aren't. Like, let's take a look at Ficant here. We find that over here. And that's got water on it, so any fleet would be able to refuel using boats and whatnot. Looking to find something. So this has a D spaceport. You'd have to own the planet to refuel, but that causes issues. But this has water. There's no easy way to see, and this is one of the problems with the game, is Trees. Just wondering if you can get yourself in a position where you're just fucked. Yeah, that has water. I don't know. There are probably places where there are. There are certainly places where you are unable to refuel due to the presence of enemy ships and or SDBs. And again, let's see how we can figure out the interaction with the retreat rules on that, because I think it's not well defined. Oh, there is nothing spelling out that a fleet is like fucked ever, but that is something that happens in Real Traveler. Okay, transports. Troops and admirals cannot move on their own. They must be transported by squadrons, the exception being the X-boat lanes. The admirals can move around on those. Catch a ride on a freighter or something, or on a passenger liner. When not being transported, troops and admirals are placed in the world box. They're never on the stellar display. There's no movement penalty to load or unload for transport. It can take place anytime in the movement phase. Troops and admirals may be loaded and unloaded at rules having enemy troops and or defense battalions. However, loading and unloading during movement may not occur if there's enemy squadrons or SDBs. Instead, you have to do it during the space-to-surface transport subset of the combat phase, which means if you have orders to leave a planet, you might have to either delay your orders or leave without the troops that you wanted to pick up. Okay. All right. So we've got costs for transport somewhere. I think we've got it on here. Yeah. So a full strength assault carrier can carry 600 troops. A damaged one can carry 300. Battle squadrons can carry 20 or 10. A cruiser can always carry its defense factor. And scouts and tankers cannot carry. X-boat movement. Yeah. X-boat movement is only interdicted by the starting and end system. So let's see if I can find an interesting example. This seems close to what I'm looking for. Here's one. So I could move from here to here, and it doesn't matter that Flume is occupied. Likewise, here's an even better one. I can go from Extolay to Regina, and it doesn't matter about Genji. Okay. The X-boat does not go to Heffrey. It just goes through that hex. Combat. So we got a whole bunch of different combat. There's static defense battalions, which are the numbers written here. Like there's one troop there. Two little troops. Anyway. Worlds having defense battalions have the number of a combat factor. Defense battalions at a single world or a single unit. Worlds can be protected by SDBs, which, if you recall, are on the left here. And those can be quite large numbers as well. The tech level of the SDBs at the world is the tech level of the world, same as the troops. They're treated as a single unit. These are your static defenses. They cannot be transported. Okay, troop units, defense units, SDB units take percentage losses in combat. If you get 10% loss in combat, you'll get a 10% marker. If you get 40% more losses, now you're at 50%. You don't worry about it's just additive. Once a unit has taken 100% losses, it's destroyed. For a troop unit, you remove the counter for play. For a defense or SDB, the world no longer has those. I don't believe there's 100% casualty markers. I'll just use a blank chit or something like that to indicate it's gone. Yeah, that's what they say. Troop defense and SDBs which have taken losses use their current strengths in combat, not their full strength. It's taken off the percentage loss table, which is why it exists. Current strength is used for troop transport. Squadrons do not take percentage losses. They take steps. Space combat. Okay. Combat is multiple rounds until one side is destroyed or disengages. Each combat round consists of a simultaneous exchange of fire between the opposing squadrons. Each player totals the attack factors and uses this total to the column to see how many defense factors they hit. I believe the defender has to, or the person being shot at, has to take at least that many hits. Yeah, the minimum number of defense factors that they must eliminate. The owning player chooses what takes the losses. Tactical ability of the leaders takes effect. At the end of each combat round, after the round's combat results, a player may disengage his squadrons. If you have the lower tactical ability, you have to decide first. If you're disengaging, all your squadrons capable of jumping to any system must jump out of the hex to a system. A squadron may disengage even if it jumped during the movement phase, as long as it's refueled by the time of the combat phase. Okay, so you can get stuck. A squadron may not disengage if it is not refueled or cannot jump to any system. You are allowed to partially disengage. You declare that you're disengaging, and the ships that can get away do. You could also stick around and take losses on the ones that aren't able to get out of there. Within a fleet, all squadrons capable of disengaging must. The jump made by the disengaging squadron is considered to occur during the movement phase of the following turn. So we'd have to notate that somehow. Additional rounds of space combat can be taken as after each disengagement. You are not prohibited from disengaging just because your opponent has done so. Seems kind of weird, but okay. The interface combat. All right, let me take a little pause here. Okay, where are we? Interface combat. So the important thing here is kind of the ordering. I've already explained kind of how it works. First, you do combat between the SDBs and squadrons. System defense subset. The player with squadrons containing SDBs announces if the squadrons are attacking the SDBs or not. If the squadrons do not attack, then they don't participate any further in the combat phase, including surface bombing and landing troops. The player with the SDBs then announces whether his SDBs are active or passive. If they're passive, I don't know what it does because it doesn't tell you. I think nothing happens, but if they're active, the combat phase proceeds as normal. If they're passive, then the following conditions are enforced. If the enemy squadrons are attacking, only one round of combat is executed, and the squadrons attack at a -3, and the SDBs don't shoot back. So you're basically hunting them in the ocean or whatever, wherever they're hiding. Squadrons use their bombardment factors to attack the SDBs. I'm trying to see if this is simultaneous. Combat results are at the end of the round. Yeah. So it's essentially simultaneous in effect. Then at the start of each subsequent round, either player can break off action. The player having the squadrons decides first. If the squadrons break off, there's no further interface combat steps, including surface bombardment and landing troops. If the SDBs break off, they're considered passive for the rest of the combat phase. In either case, no further rounds are fought. The SDBs get to break off without an additional round of being shot at. Then you do surface bombing, which hits the enemy troops and defense units on the world. They can't do this if there's enemy active SDBs still left. They may not engage in surface bombardment if they're... SDBs can't engage in surface bombardment if they're passive. They're able to fight as well. Squadrons use bombardment factor, and SDBs have a bombardment strength equal to 1/10 their current strength. They're not really built for this. Total of the bombardment strengths of all friendly squadrons and SDBs. And then you roll it. You split it as you wish to bomb enemy units on the world. Each unit is bombed separately. The total bombardment factor is used, and it's going to cause a percentage of damage to the unit. Then you're allowed to unload or load troops from the world. Then we go to surface combat. Troop units on the world all fight. The unit's current strength is the combat factors the unit has available with which to fire. You can split your combat factor to fire at multiple units. You're not required to fire during surface combat, but enemy units can attack you no matter what. A unit can be fired on only once. You total all the factors firing on it, and you get a percentage of damage to that unit. The tech level of the units influences the combat. The difference in tech level is a column shift in favor for each level of difference. The atmosphere type or habitability impacts the world. The worse the atmosphere, the more likely you're going to kill people on it. Both sides get to fire simultaneously, essentially. And let's just see. Okay, special rules. Travel zones, we already talked about them. The red worlds are the only ones that have an effect. And the Imperials are not able to operate on that world. You are allowed to use gas giants there. And you can enter the space. At the start of the game, the Zodani player controls the worlds in the Zodani Sword Worlds in Vargar. The Imperial controls the worlds within the Imperium, and the worlds outside these borders are controlled by neither player. There are some special cases. There's an Imperial naval base here and an Imperial scout base here. I think those worlds are neutral. They just have, as long as they are neutral or Imperial controlled, those bases are available to that side. If they get swung over, the bases become available to the Zodan. That is what I'm guessing. Player controls a world by destroying all enemy squadrons and SDBs. You must garrison a world that's not yours, which must be at least 1% of the full strength of the defense battalions on the world. A world with no atmosphere will surrender to the enemy under certain conditions. It will surrender when there's at least one enemy squadron in the system with an attack value greater than 0, and there are no friendly squadrons or active SDBs. Oh, this might not be wise. I am sitting on worlds that are... Oh, no, that's not hostile. This one is... I may rethink some of these. These are problematic worlds that I wanted to garrison because this is worth 13 victory points, but it doesn't make much sense to garrison it if it's just going to surrender. So I think I'm going to look at those 2 worlds that are vacuum worlds. 3 worlds? 3 worlds that are vacuum worlds. And 4 worlds, yeah, and rearrange some of my garrisons to get them off those worlds. Those were worlds that I chose for their high-tech level. Pixie's particularly interesting. I bet it's, no. I thought it would be an asteroid planet like this one because of the high-tech and whatever. Okay, so we're going to rearrange some of our forces because I did not notice that. Those units are considered to take 100% losses. However, a surrendered world still has to be garrisoned or control reverts. And you can garrison a vacuum world with a squadron that has an attack factor greater than 0. Now, the important thing here is it's not your bombardment, it's your attack factor. Esalen. Esalen starts the game with troops from both sides on it. And it's not a particularly exciting place. Motorized troops. The only ones in the game. It is a co-dominion with settlers from both states. Both sides have forces there at the beginning. Once it's controlled, a garrison is required to maintain control. And la la la. Quar and Zircon are outside the Imperium but contain Imperial bases. For game purposes, consider them to be controlled by the Imperium. Okay. I don't know what that means exactly, like, in terms of victory points and such, not. Like, it sort of seems to just, like, either say they're fully Imperial or are they just Imperial for everything except the victory conditions or what? I don't know. I hope it won't be a big deal. Admirals. Admirals have a precedence number. The most senior admiral has to have the largest fleet in any space. There are 4 different nations in the game. They each have their own ranking of navies. There are loaned admirals, however. Now, the Vargar loaned admiral, or whatever, on the Imperial side, he doesn't matter. He can't command anything else. The harder question is, what is the order of precedence here? Only Sword World admirals and only Vargar admirals can command their fleets. I guess. We'll see. This Sword World admiral, who's the most important one, is actually attached to the Zodane fleet structure and is treated like the worst ranked Zodani admiral out there, if I understand correctly. While the latter three are allied together, an admiral from one of these navies has only limited abilities to command squadrons from other navies. An admiral may not be placed in command of any fleet that contains more squadrons from other navies than it does its own navy. An admiral may not be placed in overall command of the squadrons on his side in a hex for the purposes of space combat if there are more squadrons from other allied navies present than there are from his own navy. The loaned navies or loaned admirals are not part of their navy. There's a warrant. This can come through the events thing. Any Imperial admiral with a warrant has a precedence number of 0 and is in charge of all the Imperial navies. And they can land forces on interdicted worlds, the red zones, without limitation. And I assume refuel and whatnot. And you can hand this off to different people. Hey, here's the Imperial warrant. You're now in charge of the Navy. Okay. Special symbols, armor, like I said, are doubled for combat. Elites doubled for attack value. Same thing. Psionic. The Zodani pale blue land units. I got some in there. There's one. Are psionic units. They are able to first fire. So they could actually destroy a unit or weaken its strength before it gets a chance to return fire. But only if they fire on their own. This will allow an enemy unit to be shot twice, once by the first fire and once afterwards. Guerrillas, we talked about them briefly. Guerrillas have two modes of operation, covert and overt. When covert, it's hiding and it's ignored for all purposes. When overt, it's a regular Zodani ground unit with 10% of the original strength of the planetary defense, which is why I have stacks of 5 there. You can't move them off the planet, but they're on some of the key planets for winning the war. They recover from losses and have their mode of operations determined during the guerrilla step. If they're covert at the start of the guerrilla step, they recover 10% of their full strength at this point. Ooh. Mercenaries, the Imperial, which the troops on the planet do not. The planetary garrison is weaker than the guerrillas. It will fall eventually. Mercenary, the Imperial mercenaries, if they take 50% or greater loss, more than 50% losses, their combat strength is halved. Okay, there's a secret base on the game. I am using the historical result, which is Fullerton, which I actually garrisoned because I used a mechanism for determining what I was going to garrison. And that ended up being, I'm looking for where it is. There it is. But there is a special single unit which I can declare in rebellion at any time and it'll show up there. The fact that that's garrisoned makes it less valuable for me to grab. It is one of the best planets to declare this for, because if it's not garrisoned, it's worth 13 victory points and can just be grabbed and is way far away from everything else. It's a wonderful choice for a planet for that. However, I used a rubric for determining, where I was going to garrison, which ended up getting me on vacuum worlds, no doubt. And I'm going to rearrange those. But yeah, I ended up with going by greatest victory points and ended up with a lot of these 10-point worlds. Now, what I did was I said, well, I don't really need to garrison stuff right on the enemy border because doing that is just asking to lose units. But garrisoning stuff further back, it helps prevent this from the secret base from being effective, and it helps prevent a small raid by like fast cruisers or something like that without a lot of troops. At least that's the theory. Oh, okay. Reinforcements and replacements. We've already talked about them enough, I do believe. We haven't talked about replacement points. Squadron replacement, okay, replacements, you get a certain number of points. Note that a player will not receive replacements on every turn of the game. Squadron replacements are used to rebuild squadrons. A reduced strength squadron can be rebuilt at a friendly base within the borders of its state for 1. Scouts can only be rebuilt at scout bases, or only scouts can be rebuilt at scout bases. 1 RP will rebuild a squadron. You probably want to save this for your bigger squadrons and not be spending these points on scouts, but whatever. In either case, squadron RPs can be used for any type of squadron. Costs 3 to fully rebuild, and that'll go in the reinforcement box. Troop RPs can rebuild troop units. Each troop RP replaces 1 combat factor of troops. A totally eliminated unit can be replaced by spending its full combat factor. Otherwise, where can you replace? A friendly control world with no enemy troops present. 2 RPs are required to replace each combat factor of an armor unit. Elite units may not be replaced or rebuilt. Admirals, SBDs, defense battalions may not be replaced. Guerrillas recover by their own rules, which are incredibly friendly. Like, my feeling is the entire population is anti-imperial on those planets. Okay. Sequence of setup is listed here. Victory points. Victory points need to be kind of tracked throughout the game. You don't need to count them each turn, but it's probably easiest if you keep kind of a running total of them. And again, it's the tech level of the planets taken, but outside of the national boundaries, it is halved, and it is subsector capitals are doubled. If either side gets to over 300 points, they can just declare the game's over, and they have overwhelmingly defeated the enemy and pretty much caused a collapse in this sector. Probably means the Zodane are just gone. For the Imperium, it means they're giving up the Spinward marches, you know. On the other hand, both players can agree to an armistice if they're bored of the game, and then whatever the victory point situation is taken. Otherwise, the Zodani can declare an armistice starting from turn 26. If they declare it between 26 and 51, they lose 2 levels off their victory level. And if they declare it on or after turn 52, it's shifted only 1 level in favor of the Imperials. Okay, let me take a little break, breathe a little bit. Oh, bother. I have no memory, no battery left. Hold on. That should be enough. Okay, so the last thing remaining is the optional rules. We're playing with all of these. First one's a surprise attack. The Zodani player can deploy a fleet here and another one here. There's limitations. They have to have refueling speed, jump capacity, etc. to get there. This one can alert the Imperium, though, so I'm not going to use that one. But this one just allows me to deploy a little bit further forward. Seems like a good idea. The Black Globe Generator. These 4 ships have Black Globe generators. They have special abilities. When they jump into a system, they can have their generators operating fully, and the fleet is indetectable. Add a Black Globe step to the combat phase immediately before space combat. If a fleet containing only Black Globe squadrons jumps into a hex, it can launch a surprise attack against enemy squadrons where the first round of combat, the enemy can't fire on you. That's actually the big deal with it. But this is not like the Black Globe completely makes you impervious to all energy. So sort of. It can overload, but it basically has a defensive factor, which should result in a high defense value, which these ships have, and It can also be used to withdraw from it should be able to be used to withdraw from a combat more easily, which I don't think it allows. You can make a surprise surface bombing attack or unload and load troops. In either case, you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to do one round of surface bombing or load unload troops without being interfered with by fleets or SDBs. Once the step is done, though, you go to the regular combat phase, and the Black Globe ships have no additional capabilities. They're jump troops. They're basically able to slip into a planet even if there's SDBs defending the planet. Squadron Quality. Okay. There's different tech levels which are not tracked on the ships. What there is you determine the quality level of the squadrons that are present, which can be either standard or low, and at least half the total attack factor has to be provided by the higher value to get a bonus, or to get the higher value thing. Basically, Imperial ships, because they're higher tech in general, get a +1 shift against the Zodani. Same with standard versus low goes to +2. Imperial low versus Zodani low goes to +1. Zodani standard versus Imperial low, though, creates a +1 shift in favor of the Zodani. That's the only way that the Zodani can get a column shift. And then there are suggestions of how to incorporate this into role-playing, and then the list of all the information. Well, I gotta fix some of the setup. I'll come back with that and then kind of close things up for the video. Back to my memories of the game, and I've gotten everybody off the vacuum worlds. And kind of why I seem to remember that I gave up all the time on it is that it's slow and tedious, plotting out all the movements. It requires an amount of planning and understanding that kind of reminds me of Vietnam, in terms that I'm working really, really hard and not so much working on the big picture of the game. You know, so one of the mentionings of it, one of the variants of this was to try to create more of a War in the Pacific type game. And they worried about the combat chart going, I think, with more of a buckets of dice type version, and getting rid of the simultaneous movement and all that stuff. Honestly, that's the stuff that I don't really mind that much. What I found myself minding more was the hex by hex tracking of everything, which planets are vulnerable, which aren't, the refueling concepts, all of that. Now, this is all what the game's about. And so, you know, it just ended up being a lot of effort. And yes, the simultaneous movement is part of the effort. This is part of the effort, figuring out the different combat charts and all the different interactions on it. It just ended up a lot of pain in the ass for very little of the kind of view that I really wanted. If you wanted me to point to something, a better sort of strategic naval game that works pretty well and is closer to that Victory in the Pacific scale or flavor, I would go with the Company War. It's a Mayfair game. I've already covered it, and I think it actually cuts to the the chase of that sort of naval operations in space, in the same sort of way that Victory in the Pacific cuts to things a lot better than, like, SPI's War in the Pacific would. If you want the details, if you wanna have to worry about all the intricacies, yeah, this and War in the Pacific are more what you're aiming for. If you're looking for something that's on the very light level, Company War is a good choice. I don't really have anything in between to say right away. Somewhere or another, I mean, I have a lot of space games. Many of them are multiplayer type things like Throne World, Web and Starship. Actually, the Imperium is better suited to my taste than this. Some of these I have not played at all, so I can't speak too much of them. Diadem, I think, was actually a pretty good kind of in-between game. Why am I doing these here? I don't know. Because I haven't done a best in space, in strategic space conflict. So a lot of the space conflict games are kind of like Space Empire's 4X, where you have multiple people kind of, doing this 4X type thing, rather than dealing with a single war, where you're trying to resolve the situations. And Diadem is actually more along that line as well, although it's multiplayer, but so it's not really a fair choice there either. Yeah, I'm having a hard time coming up with anything that I feel really worked better than this. Web and Starship has this weird 3D element. Some of the SPI ones also felt like they go into like these detailed battle maps and stuff like that, and you don't really need that. Company War does too, for that matter, as an optional rule. I found that kind of annoying, to tell you the truth. But this one really goes into that sort of island hopping type flavor that you see in the Pacific theater in World War II. But I'm trying to think of something. You've got like in the World War II Pacific, you have things like Empire of the Sun that give you more of that strategic view of the situation without falling to the Victory in the Pacific level of game. Now, I would say Company War doesn't quite fall to that level, but it comes close, It comes close. It has some really neat facets to it, though, because of the way the supply works in that's a little different. Here, you don't really have supply constraints. Ships are capable of operating for forever, except for the need to fuel. And so the need to fuel allows you to like penetrate the enemy deeply, and you still have whatever resources you need. You can operate cut off as long as you can obtain a fuel source. So that will create a kind of interesting circumstance here. Anyway, I've babbled more than enough, and I'm going to send this one up.